Information you're learning tonight, and so thank you for being good citizens. My name is Tom Brody. I'm the publisher of the Star News, and I'll be your moderator tonight. Just a few quick comments. First of all, thank you to Idaho First Bank and Sherry Moppin for donating the use of this room tonight. As you already know, there's water and cookies over here. Please feel free to get up and take those at any time. We won't mind if you get up. And also, the bathrooms at the top of the stairs to the right, if that happens to be something you need as well. There's question forms that you found at your seats. If you need a form, ask your neighbor for a form. And we'll only be accepting written questions tonight. And I will only read the questions that I can read, so please print. And I will only read those that have names and hometowns of the people asking the question. So no anonymous. But I'll read all of them if I get them. So if you have written questions, hold up your hand. Tommy, my helper over here, will be happy to collect those. And you can fill those out at any time during the forum. Okay, just a reminder about the voting next Tuesday. Of course, you have to live in the city limits of McCall to vote. And the polling place is the D.A. McNichols building, also known as the high school annex, over on Mission Street. Polling's open between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And if you're not registered, you can register at the polls. If you either show your driver's license or Idaho State ID card that has a physical address on it, or something that has a physical address like a utility bill or a credit card bill. So, okay, now let's get to the format of the forum. We're going to start with the ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage, with speakers opposed and in favor. Then we'll move on to the local option tax package. And we have two proponents. We'll describe what's included in that. And we have three candidates for McCall City Council, and they will give remarks. Because we have a relatively small number of speakers, I have not put a time limit on the remarks, but I would just advise the speakers that if you see members of the audience checking their phones, it's probably time to wrap up. So. And then after everyone has spoken, I will ask the written questions. So does anyone have any questions on the format? Anybody at the head table or the audience? Okay, then let's proceed. We'll start first with the petition initiative on the ballot to raise the minimum wage in McCall. This initiative needs a simple 50% majority to pass. If it is passed, the minimum wage paid in McCall would raise the current state minimum wage of $7.25 an hour to $8.75 in 2016 and the $10.25 in 2017. Tipped workers would be raised from $3.35 now to $6.56 in 2016 and $7.69 in 2017. And then the minimum wage would continue to rise according to a yearly indexing of cost of living. So speaking in opposition first is Dr. Peter Crabb. Peter is a professor of finance and economics of Northwest Nazarene University. So I'll turn it over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the invitation. I must first say at the outset that my views expressed tonight are not those necessarily of my institution. So they are my own. But thank you, Tom, for the invitation. Great to be here and speak on this issue. This issue, to me, is like a broken record. Right then I usually have to stop with my students because they don't know what a record is. And that thing that plays music in your, I gotta explain my idiom to them first. But once we get past that, I can explain the idea that the arguments that are put forth for initiatives like these seem to keep coming up again and again, despite being refuted in the past. And this new initiative still has no grounding in economic theory, political economy, or correct moral reasoning. So before you tonight, I will argue that the initiative here, particularly with the indexing part of the proposal, has no grounding in the economic theory or data, does not include any political concessions that would make it more acceptable to employers, and is unjustified by straight moral reasoning. So these such initiatives of these definitely talk, usually, most often, about there will be no loss of jobs. And we might actually see higher earnings. Unfortunately, the statistical science behind all the research that is cited by such proponents is far from conclusive. For example, there's data from professors and research professors at University of Massachusetts Amherst and other schools that used county-level data to study restaurants and other low-wage industries about the minimum wage. They determined in that study that there were no employment effects from minimum wage increases. However, the authors go on to say that several factors warrant caution in applying these results. For example, they say that their results should not be extrapolated to predict the impact of a minimum wage increase that is much larger than what we studied and we experienced over the period under study. And the period under study did not include indexing. It was 1990 to 2006. The federal rate in particular was raised just a few times over that period, so the sample size was relatively small. Moreover, this same research that is widely used by proponents was published in 2010, but the statistical methodology was shown to be flawed by the National Bureau of Economic Research, published just last year in 2014. The authors also say that they did not test whether restaurants respond to minimum wage increases by hiring more skilled workers and fewer less skilled ones. And economic theory predicts just that. So even if we accept the research that says employment levels will not decline, the bigger economic consequences of a higher minimum wage is a reduction in employee benefits or hours worked, particularly for those at the bottom of the wage scale. While some employers may reduce labor by increasing capital investments, other firms can be expected to reduce the employees' non-wage benefits and/or their hours worked. A minimum wage increase induces employers to drop or reduce health insurance benefits, increasing the number of uninsured in our economy. Economist John Schmidt from the Center for Economic and Policy Research cited this exact possibility in a 2013 report that, again, many proponents of wage increases use. So he actually predicted lower benefits, less hour work. There's a striking example of this fact in the federal data. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average weekly hours worked by production and non-supervisory employers in the leisure and hospitality industry has declined from 33 in 1965 to only 25 today, all the time while the national minimum wage was going up. So Professor David Murphy at Texas Tech University has this to say about the ongoing economic research on minimum wage laws. I quote, "Many economists who currently support large minimum wage hikes claim that the best research now shows that such an increase would not cause significant drops in employment. However, the conclusion relies on a dubious reading of the literature." So, as the doctor who takes an oath to do no harm, we too should not make economic policy based on very inconclusive research. So that's the economic argument. The political argument requires trade-offs. All political actions and initiatives require some kind of trade-off. In my experience, however, proponents of increases in the minimum wage rarely argue that taxes on businesses that are used to pay for other social programs should be reduced in response to raising the minimum wage. But political economy requires such a more balanced proposal. So, for example, if it's said that it's a conservative argument that raising the minimum wage will reduce social spending, well, if that's true, then we should reduce the taxes that are used to fund such social programs. But in fact, that's not what's going to happen. The income-based programs such as food stamps or Medicaid would not change. Raising the minimum wage would not change the income eligibility for those programs, particularly with the indexing clause, because the same programs are adjusted for inflation. Furthermore, the amount employers are required to make in FICA or SUTA payments will rise under this new law. So are we willing to reduce the employer's share of payroll taxes and unemployment insurance in response to requiring them to pay higher wages? So if we are to be realistic about the political environment today, any proposal to raise the minimum wage must be accompanied by a reduction in employer taxes and/or increases in the eligibility requirements under current government social programs. Another political problem with raising the minimum wage is the consequence of higher income inequality over time. The higher cost of labor resulting from an increase in the minimum wage creates the incentive for business owners to use more capital. Employers that are unable to legally hire low-wage workers substitute more capital in their production process or in their services. As French economist Thomas Piketty has shown, using international data, when the returns to capital exceed the rate of growth in the economy, income inequality rises. Thus, as more businesses substitute capital for labor, we can expect the political hot button issue of income inequality to actually worsen with higher minimum wages. So those are the political problems. But I conclude with the moral issues surrounding this question. The moral problem with increasing the minimum wage includes decreasing opportunities for younger workers, as well as the questionable moral authority that governments may have to mandate prices for businesses and individuals alike. Empirical research has demonstrated that any employment effects on higher minimum wages fall disproportionately on low-skilled workers, who in turn are mostly younger. Again, back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only 1 in 40 over the age of 25 earned the federal minimum wage or less in 2014. So an increase in the minimum wage can thereby be characterized as a redistribution of income from younger workers to older workers. So it begs the question, do we have a moral right to burden this segment of the labor force when we have already done so with other unfunded liabilities in government social programs? Proponents of a hike in the minimum wage requirements often use a moral argument when they claim any social or ethical responsibility for businesses and corporations. It is said, particularly with regards to large corporations, that they have a responsibility to pay workers more. It's simple justice, they say. If, however, you impose a moral obligation on a particular group, which a corporation is, in fact, then logically you must impose the same on all groups. Otherwise, we are guilty of showing partiality in justice, which is immoral. Yale University professor of law, Stephen Carter, frames the question this way. So suppose a great big company has a retail center in your town and pays its employees slightly more than the minimum wage. Suddenly, the minimum wage is increased, and great big company decides to close its store and move elsewhere because its employees are, in turn, asking for higher wages. Has the company committed a moral wrong against its employees? If you answer yes to this question, do you feel the same way about a family that decides it can no longer afford to pay for lawn care or snow shoveling, and it hands the keys to the mower and the snowblower back to their kids and away from the service that they previously hired? At any rate, Professor Carter's logic shows that the moral case for higher minimum wages is only invalid if it's imposed on everyone. Furthermore, if we determine we do have a moral right to tell people what to pay for labor services, we then must also have a moral justification for any or all prices. We will find a moral reason for fixing gasoline prices, food prices, land prices. Again, proper moral reasoning requires consistent and impartial application of the rules based on the underlying ethics. So, in conclusion, let's stop playing the broken record. An increase in the minimum wage will hurt the economy, exacerbate other political issues of the day, such as business taxes and income inequality, and has no moral grounding. I appreciate your attention and your consideration of my arguments. I look forward to your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, let me introduce you first. I'm sure everybody thinks they know, but this is Jeff Burns from Fair Wage McCall. Fair Wage McCall, of course, is the organization that did gather the petitions to put this initiative on the ballot. So take it away, Jeff.
Okay.
Would you mind using the microphone, please?
I rather not. I chase them all out of the room because I speak rather loudly anyhow. Well, the campaign season's heating up.
Can't hear you.
No,
Can't hear you.
use the
Yeah,
mic,
yeah, you
please.
can't.
Yeah.
We can't hear you.
We spoke at a forum in this room.
Excuse me, we have a hearing issue here.
No, okay. I will speak. All right. Campaign season is heating up. Good. All right, the campaign season's heating up. We're seeing a lot of opposition move in. A lot of ads in the newspaper and on the social media. My personal favorite is the ad that says, "Keep McCall local." And then at the bottom of the page, in very small print, it says, "Paid for by the National Restaurant Association." That's a $71 million a year organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. So how is that local? And in fact, Peter's not local either. He's been set up here, well, you can tell, he's by far the best dressed guy in the room. Anyhow, he's been set up here by the Idaho Freedom Foundation to prevent us from what has been called a dangerous social experiment. After all, we're proposing to raise the minimum wage in McCall 41%. Never been done before, especially not in a small town like McCall, except in the last 10 years, when the federal minimum wage was increased from $5.15 an hour to $7.25 an hour. Exactly the same 41%. So in fact, we all know the consequences of a 41% minimum wage increase. The town didn't dry it up, it didn't blow away, but we still got to chew it over. So here we are. I got my first job more than 50 years ago in a little valley, a lot like our Long Valley, Montana. I was a skinny little guy, just barely 5 feet tall. I was in a hurry to be a man. Boy, was I stupid. Anyhow, I talked my way to that job, and I stacked 1,100 tons of hay that year. So if you ever see me walking around like this, that's the summer of '63 right there. A few years later, I found myself in the city. And the only thing I was good for was working hard. So I found myself on a construction site, took up carpentry. About 40 years ago, I was swinging a hammer, making $12 an hour. And I got health insurance, I got a retirement plan, I got vacation pay. And I worked my way up to construction management, and I finished my career as a small contractor down in the valley. So you take that $12 an hour I was making about 40 years ago, 30 years after that, I was running a large construction project in Southern California. And I had carpenters and laborers working on that project, making $8 or $10 an hour, 30 years later. And quitting time had come and these guys would leave. But what I found out is they were waiting until I pulled out in my truck and they were sneaking back into the building. They were homeless, working people in Southern California, doing the same job I had been doing 30 years earlier and making a decent living. McCall's changed a lot in the last 40 years too. Used to be a sawmill here, logging jobs, jobs in the mines. Sawmill's gone. What we have now, we've got a lake, we've got mountains, we've got a couple ski hills, hiking and biking trails. In a town of 3,000 people, we have over 2,000 vacation homes, homes that are occupied just a few weeks out of the year. In the summer and during ski season, we get a huge influx of people. So what we have, we don't have a sawmill anymore, we've got restaurants and hotels. According to the Idaho Department of Labor, more than 1 in 4 people, workers in Valley County are employed in a restaurant or a hotel. And not coincidentally, about 1 in 4 workers earn $10.25 an hour or less. Now, not too long ago, the Star News asked us to interview some of these workers. They were going to use the interview in an article. So I started interviewing. I just interviewed 17 people. And of those 17 people, 10 were parents. And among those 10, they had 19 children. I interviewed 17 people, and I found 19 children. We've got hundreds of people earning $10.25 an hour or less. We've got hundreds of children dependent upon them. What does that say about our future? When we have so many children raised in the direst of circumstances. Of those 17 people, 11 of them said that they were dependent on some social program just to get by each month. That's food stamps, Medicaid, rent subsidies, the food bank. 11 of 17. These are working people. Now, I want to tell you that we wouldn't be doing this if we thought that it would in any way be harmful to McCall businesses. I understand that we don't have any McDonald's, we don't have any Walmarts, we don't have any big corporate bad guys. What we have is a lot of small business people who put a lot on the line. And some of them are just getting by themselves. I understand that. You know, I was a home builder down in the valley when the world fell apart. I know what it's like to lay awake at night, trying to figure out how you're going to save your business. I get it. But there are a lot of benefits to raising people's wages. Number one, those jobs become more valuable to the worker. We have a problem with McCall workers moving from one job to another, chasing a little bit better wage. Employee turnover drops and training costs drop. Any business owner knows what a pain it is and how expensive it is to keep training new people, and that drops. Absenteeism falls, labor productivity increases. And here's the biggest difference, the biggest benefit to paying people more. When your rent increases and you write that check for that increased rent, that money's gone. When your cost of goods sold increases and you write that check, that money's gone. When your payroll increases and you write that bigger check, that money stays in the community. Low-wage workers tend, when they get a raise, they spend that increase. They spend 100% of it. They spend it almost immediately, and they spend it locally. And that money gets spent, respent, and there's a multiplier effect. For every dollar that you increase your employees' pay, the community gets $1.60 back. So this is a total win-win. We can help people and help business at the same time. Now, there's a lot of things Peter said that I would take issue with. I would certainly deny that the overwhelming economic data shows disemployment effects, but I'm not going to go into all of those economic studies. You can look at our website, we have links to them, but what I'm going to tell you is just a little anecdotal evidence that you've all experienced. If you drive down, leave McCall, drive down, we've probably all done it, drive through Payette and Fruitland and into Ontario, Oregon, you find out that all of the restaurants and hotels are on the Oregon side. Oregon's minimum wage is $9.25 an hour, ours is $7.25. Their tipped worker minimum wage is $9.25 an hour. Ours is $3.35 an hour. Their minimum wage, tipped worker minimum wage is 276% higher. So I recently, within the last couple of weeks, I just researched BLS data to see how many low-wage workers there are on each side. Okay, on the Oregon side, the high-wage side, in accommodation and food services industry, there are 1,089 workers. On the low-wage Idaho side, accommodation and food services, there are 189. There are more than 7 times as many workers working in those industries as there are in the low-wage Idaho side. They raised their minimum wage. They didn't lose jobs. We won't either, and we know it, because remember, we did this just a few years ago. Town didn't dry up and blow away. Now, I'd like to close by telling you about a young woman I talked to recently. She's 27 years old. She's a mother, has 2 children, a daughter 4, and a son 2.5-year-old son. And she works as a hotel housekeeper. Makes $9 an hour. And she's lucky because she gets 40 hours a week. Unfortunately, recently, her 2.5-year-old son was diagnosed with autism. And she looked at me with almost pleading eyes, hoping that I would have some magic answer for her, as she told me that the children's father just couldn't take it anymore. And he had recently left the home. So she's left alone to raise 2 children, one of them autistic. She told me, I don't know how I'm going to pay for daycare. I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. Well, we can't solve all of her problems, but we can throw her a lifeline. We can help her and hundreds of others like her. We can take a step in the right direction. And I want to ask, how do you think she's going to spend that extra $100 a week she takes home? You think she's going to call her broker and order another 100 shares of General Electric? Yeah. You think she's going to hop in her SUV and head to Boise on a shopping spree? No. She's going to spend that money right here in McCall. She's going to spend it on groceries. She's going to spend it on daycare. She's going to spend it in our business community. We help her, help all the people like her, and help McCall businesses. All we need to do is vote yes on Initiative 1.
Okay, we have several great questions here, so we're going to get through them. Again, I'll read every one as long as we all have the patience to listen to them. Several people have written more than one question, so I'm going to go through one question from each person who wrote one, and then if we have time or if they're still relevant, to go ahead and ask the second and third questions in some cases from the same person. So the first question is for Peter Crabb. This is from Michael Shannon. And Michael wants to know, he says that more than 600 economists, 7 of them Nobel Prize winners in economics, have signed on to a letter in support of raising the minimum wage. Why should I believe your viewpoint over 7 Nobel Prize winners?
Terrific question, and I appreciate it. The key to answering that was in my point earlier, that there is a lot of discussion on this issue. But the empirical research is still inconclusive. The idea that there are no employment effects suggests that, yeah, this will do no harm. But the studies that are used are static in nature, and we don't know what the changes are. So, to the view of the 600 economists that see this as doing no harm, including 7 that have received a Nobel Prize, but I'll note that there has yet to be a Nobel Prize for someone that has studied the minimum wage law, so you can check that on me. Is still, they see it as a politically palatable idea. We can do this without doing any harm. But it's essentially a slippery slope. It doesn't take into account the political economy of the issue. It doesn't take in the moral questions of the issue. So if I don't find any employment effects, then I'm going to agree with this issue and I'm going to go with it. But that's not thinking through the whole issue, and that's just looking at particular economic statistics, which is dangerous for any subject.
Okay, this question is for both Dr. Crabb and Jeff. It's from Craig Campbell of McCall. And Craig wants to know that, he states that this initiative that states that there will be up to a 41.67% increase in wages for the lowest paid unskilled workers. Fair Wage McCall suggests there will be a similar increase for those who make approximately 20% more than the new minimum wage. How much of an increase should someone who currently earns $12 an hour after the initiative passes? What is fair for these more skilled workers? We'll start with Jeff.
Well, the minimum wage is going to increase 41%. That doesn't mean that all workers will get a 41% raise. And where we state that this will affect workers making up to $12 an hour, maybe $12.50, that's based on research that shows that workers making within 20 to 25% of the new minimum wage also get a little bump in pay. So a person that's currently making $11 an hour is very unlikely to get a 41% increase, but they might get bumped up to $11.50 or 12. So there will be some benefit. Obviously, the biggest benefit will come to workers making $7.25 an hour, because they will be required to be paid $10.25. But not all workers will get a 41% increase.
Okay, yeah, I'll just say that the question begs the whole point. We don't know. And the idea that we can estimate a $2 million impact and this change in job levels, or who's going to, you simply don't know. If you look at the research, again, it cherry picks, if you would. The proponents tend to cherry pick what looks good in one city may not be true in another city. You can't generalize these research findings that might happen at the local level. So I wonder if the 600 economists and the 7 that Nobel Prize winners would admit that they don't know.
Okay, Peter, we have several questions for you, as you might expect. So the next one is from Jim Graham of McCall. He says, Fair Wage McCall repeatedly claims that there is no empirical evidence that raising the minimum wage has no negative economic impact. I have seen many economic reports that say otherwise. What do you say?
again, I'll just say, I think we're cherry picking on the studies. And the statistical methodology that's going on in these studies is known as static analysis. So the idea is that if the wage goes up by this amount and these workers now have, say, $100 more a week, then if all else is equal, you might remember if you had an econ class, we used to use the nice Latin term, ceteris paribus. You know, if all else is equal, then that extra $100 is new money. Well, all else is never equal. So we don't know what that spending will be. We don't know where that spending will be. And the question begs a point. For most of these workers, if including the ones that go from $11.50 to $12.00, their subsidies under current health care law will decline by that. And so their additional wages will have to go to their health insurance payments under current laws.
The question, if I heard it correctly, said that nowhere, we allege that no economic studies show disappointment effects. That's absolutely not true. We recognize that, for instance, David Newmark and William Washer's studies consistently show disemployment effects. The problem with their main study is it was a nationwide study over time. They had no control group. And they did show disemployment effects. The states with the lowest minimum wage had increasing employment. Employment increased much faster than in the low wage states. But they didn't take into account that concurrent with their study, there was a massive internal migration from the snow belt to the sun belt. And the snow belt is in the upper Midwest and the Northeast, where minimum wages tend to be higher, and a lot of the low-wage states are Arizona, Texas, Florida. And while this study was going on, Phoenix was growing from 200,000 to a metropolis of several million. And the statement has been made by Peter that the economists are cherry-picking their sites. Well, in fact, and he referenced the Dubay-Lester-Wright study, and Dubay-Lester-Wright studied concurrent or contiguous counties across the state line where the minimum wage differed. So they had a study group and a control group. It was a much more scientific way of analyzing the data. And they found 288 of these counties like Payette County, Idaho, and Malheur County, Oregon, and Kootenai County, Idaho, and Spokane County, Washington. And it was based on, and they studied them over a period of 16 and a half years using BLS data. So nobody was cherry picking their sites, and they concluded that there are no disemployment effects to minimum wage raises.
Okay, Peter, one more question for you, then we'll go to this side of the table. David Webster wants to know, who is funding your presentation tonight, and what funding sources do you have for your research and publications? The object of the question is to identify any outside influences you may be subject to.
There's my funding source. Yeah, I'm here on my own accord, and the question does beg my interest. Right across this table, I'm probably the only one who can't vote in this election. Because yes, I do live in Canyon County, Idaho. But I do care about this place. I can show you the pictures of me teaching my kids to ski, and why my daughter doesn't like bluebirds, because that's the name of the chairlift she filmed. And so the questions, you know, I do care about what's going on in this area. I'm here on my own accord. I am very passionate about this issue. I've written on it a number of times, and it is a very dangerous type of policy to go forward with.
This is from Tom Welty, who says, raising the federal minimum wage did not have an adverse effect on McCall's economy. A higher minimum wage in Oregon has not adversely affected the economy in Ontario. Why would increasing the minimum wage in McCall adversely affect the economy? Your statistics seem flawed, and selectively present negative facts and ignore the positive impact of raising the minimum wage.
Okay, I'm sorry, I did not ignore the positive impacts because I know what they are. There are certain people that will make more money. I'm not ignoring that, but there's no such thing as a free lunch. That additional income is coming from somebody else in one form or another. And so I'm not ignoring any positive impact. I'm just trying to explain the economic principles that are behind such an action. But Mr. Burnson made the same point in his early comments, that there was no negative impact of higher federal minimum wages on McCall over a 3 or 4 decade period as the federal minimum wage went up. It's correct that there were no employment effects, but in his points, he actually mentioned some of the negative impacts. There are more people today that work multiple jobs at low wages because they don't get the same hours of work that they might have. In my earlier points, talked about the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that shows, particularly in the leisure and service sectors, the number of hours of work have gone down. And the likelihood of a low-skilled worker working multiple jobs has increased. So there's one negative from that action. So to the Oregon issue, Mr. Burns again brought up, why are all the hotels listed on the other side of the river? And it's, if you look at all the factors, including property taxes, the hotel and sales taxes, and different policies in Oregon, it's easy to explain why the hotels are located there. Secondly, the interchanges on the other side of the river in Oregon are federally funded, and thus making it easier and better for the hotels to put on there. There's a number of factors as why the hotels are there. So I'm not ignoring any data. So I question the presumptions behind the question that there definitely is a lot more to look at that issue.
I'm going to wade into some murky territory because I'm going to question something a PhD in economics just said. He said the money that the workers get paid has to come out of somebody's pocket. And to us, that seems intuitive. But I seem to remember something called the velocity of money, and the faster money turns over, the money supply expands. So you're not necessarily, you could answer this, you're not necessarily taking money, you're putting more money into the community. And this is a misunderstanding that we as lay people have. That if you pay Peter, it has to come from Paul. Well, in the short run it does, but that money comes back magnified. It's called the multiplier effect. I'm going to get it now.
No time for economics, but you can inject it in on one of your next answers if you want to. This is for you, Jeff. This is so I've asked questions from all my questioners who have submitted one question. So I'm going to go back and ask the multiple questions from those who submitted more than one question, unless somebody else has a question in writing that they haven't submitted yet. If not, we'll continue. This is from Jim Graham to Jeff. How did you calculate that 700 families would be affected by this initiative? That would be 44.41% of the workforce.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. We start out with the Idaho Department of Labor's figures that 34.3%, let's call it a third, of the workers in Valley County earn $12 an hour or less. And I use that $12 an hour number because research shows that workers earning 20 to 25% above the new minimum wage also increase in income. There are 4,100 workers in Valley County, according to the BLS data in 2014. I would assume, and this is just, not scientific, but I would assume because half of the businesses, just going through the yellow pages in Valley County, are located within the city limits of McCall, that 2,000 of those workers are in McCall. A third of them is close to 700, but those are the workers that are directly affected. The workers and businesses are directly affected by this initiative. And I believe that because businesses in Donnelly and Tamarack are competing for the same labor pool, they will be indirectly affected by this. So I would say any worker who's employed this side of Little Garner Summit would be affected by this. And I would guess, I'm just guessing, that is conservatively 3/4 of the workforce in Valley County. That's 3,000 workers. We got a third of them. That's 1,000 now. That's more than 700 that we can claim. That does not take into account Brundage and New Meadows, which are in Adams County. So the 700 number is a very conservative number.
Okay, Peter, back to you. This is another question from Michael Shannon. The minimum wage has been raised 23 times since 1938, and the sky has not fallen. Each time it has been raised, it was opposed by those who said it was going to cost jobs and wreck the economy, which I believe is factually untrue. Why is the situation different now?
The situation is not different now. And the presumption, again, behind the question is that it has done no harm. And that's, I guess, where we differ. That Mr. Shannon is just interpreting the facts differently than I am. We're both looking at the same data, and this does happen in social science as well as physical science. You look at the same data and you interpret it differently. The art of economics is to see not just the direct consequences of an action, which is somebody has $100 more a week, but to look at all the unintended or additional consequences of an action. And they are multiple, and they're very difficult to measure statistically. The statistics we're trying to measure are about people. And I've tried it on my students. You try to get them in a vacuum and test little things on them, and you just can't do it. Yes, since 1938, the minimum wage has risen, but so have a lot of other things happened over that time. So isolating the consequences of this particular action it's very difficult to do in the data. So that's why I presented to you not just the economic arguments against such initiatives, but the political economy of the issue as well as the moral consequences of such an issue.
Okay, now back to Jeff. Another question from Craig Campbell. This is a study on the fairwagemccall.com website is about the minimum wage increase that the city of Santa Fe, New Mexico did in 2004. In 2014, the county commissioners in Santa Fe County, in which the city is located, decided to raise the minimum wage in the rest of the county to match that of the city of Santa Fe. If the Santa Fe city minimum wage was so successful, why did it take county commissioners 10 years to do the same?
He wants me to compliment him again. Because he asked this question on our Facebook page. And I said, well, gee, Craig, it's because people like you fought it. He said, thanks. And I'm glad he asked that question because I really wanted to share that. I mean, this is more anecdotal than scientific. But in 2004, the city of Santa Fe raised their minimum wage one whack, 65%, and then they came back the next year and raised it another dollar. They raised it 85% in 2 years, twice as much as we're talking about. Their minimum wage today, it's indexed for inflation, their minimum wage today is $10.84 an hour. Well, Santa Fe is a city of about 70,000 people. And the county of Santa Fe outside it has about the same population, about 70,000 people. Well, last year, the county commissioners voted unanimously to match Santa Fe's minimum wage. Now, can you imagine 5 politicians voting to match Santa Fe's minimum wage if the consequences had been catastrophic? No. No, they cited the fact that in the previous years, while employment was falling statewide, it was actually rising in the city of Santa Fe. There are benefits to raising the minimum wage.
Okay. Jackie, you are next. McCall is a small town of 3,000 people with a seasonal economy. Businesses really have to make most revenues during the 4 to 6 months of the tourist season. Are there any studies out there that looked at the impact of a minimum wage increase on a single small city on an entire state that only has 3,000 people and a seasonal economy? Has this been tried in any similar cities that you are aware of?
I don't know of any studies that have been done at that level, and my expectation is that should they try to do a study at that level, again, the results were going to be dubious, to use the word I said before. It's just going to be too small the sample size, and you can't control for all the other factors.
I don't know of any studies. We would like to have a study done, and you'd have to find a control community. I've suggested to some economists that they could use catching as a control community. I don't know how many, I haven't gotten anybody who's really interested in doing the study, but what I really want to answer is the question about enforcement, because this has come up. I'm part of the group that wrote the initiative, and when we were writing it, we had a meeting with the city manager, and we showed them that enforcement section, because we didn't want to tie the city into a position they weren't comfortable with. And so, based on our meeting, we did change the language to accommodate them. It was originally written that the city manager's office would enforce it, because we were talking to the city manager. He said, whoa, 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 I got enough on my lap. So we just wrote it so they have the choice of enforcing it in the manner that they want. Sounds like the city clerk will be in charge of that. As to the cost, that's a very important question. It was brought up very early in the process. I contacted the city manager's office in the city of Santa Fe to find out what it was costing them. And they told me that they're a big enough city to have on-staff legal, and their attorney was spending 8 to 10 hours a month on it. Now keep in mind, they're a city more than 20 times the size of McCall. So the enforcement costs should be minimal.
Okay, now the last question, starting with Peter, and Jeff, if he wants to chime in. Is there any evidence that someone who is paid the least amount by law, regardless of the minimum wage, that they will be more loyal, or will work harder?
No, in fact, again, you can't control for all factors, but productivity in that wage group has changed very little over time without the substitution of capital. So again, the evidence is weak again with that area, but it suggests that we would see, if anything, it suggests that we would see more businesses substitute capital for labor, as I argued before.
Well, our audience is diminishing very quickly. But see, one of the reasons that there aren't big disemployment effects is because some workers are hard to replace. It's hard to get a robot to clean a hotel room. You need a person to do that. And really, even at $10.25, they're not very expensive. The same is true in the restaurant industry. It's hard to replace those people. So That's another reason they're a big disappointment.
Okay, thank you all for staying with us. Grab a cookie and some water on your way out. Don't forget to vote.